Solemn ceremonies. President Donald Trump and First Lady Melania Trump are among those remembering the anniversary of the September 11th terror attacks. Narrow victory. A Republican wins the special election in North Carolina, what it means for the 2020 presidential campaign. Brexit update. Scotland's highest court issues a ruling on the Prime Minister's suspension of UK's Parliament. And witness to history. We talk with a helicopter pilot and his unique duty 18 years ago. On EWTN News Nightly for Wednesday, September 11th, 2019. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you for joining us for News from a Catholic Perspective. I'm Wyatt Goolsby. Americans pay tribute today to the heroes and victims of 9/11. Thousands of people lost their lives 18 years ago. Today, their memory lives on with special ceremonies in New York, Pennsylvania, and Washington, D.C. White House correspondent Mark Irons shares their story. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Wyatt. President Trump stood in silence here at the White House to mark the anniversary of the day the U.S. was attacked by terrorists. September 11th will always be etched in our memory, and the tributes started pouring in today, starting at Ground Zero.
Oh, say, can you see?
Music fills the air in New York City, where planes were used to attack America. Survivors and family members read the names of all of those who died on this date in 2001.
Nina Patrice Bell.
Debbie S. Bellows.
President Trump and the First Lady started their remembrance standing silently on the White House South Lawn while bells rang and a bugler played taps. From there, they traveled to the Pentagon to honor September 11th victims and warn America's enemies never to consider another attack.
And if for any reason they come back to our country, we will go wherever they are and use power the likes of which the United States has never used before.
In Pennsylvania, Vice President Mike Pence praised the passengers who brought down Flight 93. The heroic act cost their own lives, but saved those in Washington where the hijacked plane was likely headed.
For what your loved ones did, for my little family and countless others in our nation's capital that day. We thank you.
The president also mentioned the September 11th compensation fund. It has paid out more than $5.5 billion to people with potential September 11th health-related problems. This summer, Congress voted to make sure those funds will not run out. Wyatt.
White House correspondent Mark Irons reporting. Thanks, Mark. Two conservative Republicans win special elections in North Carolina. Today, House members from both parties tell us what those results could mean for 2020, from who's going to take control of Congress to who's going to win the White House. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi joins us with the details. Jason?
White Republican Dan Bishop will soon take his spot here at the United States Capitol. He was one of the lead sponsors of North Carolina's bathroom bill. It would require people use the bathroom of the sex listed on their birth certificate. Republicans looking at last night's results say it provides a blueprint for 2020.
Republicans celebrate a win in this congressional district they've held since 1963.
I hope the Democrats in Washington are watching this incredible victory and realize what they're doing is not working.
Republican Dan Bishop won by a little more than 2 points in a district President Trump won by 11 points. He rallied for Republicans on the eve of the special election.
The radical Democrats want to dismantle, demolish, and destroy everything that you've gained, and they will do it, and it won't take that long.
And he takes credit for the win. North Carolina Republican Mark Meadows tells me Trump is key to winning.
We've looked at the data coming out of this, and I can tell you that wherever the president was, and we ran a pro-Trump message, this candidate overperformed 2018 results under the previous candidate, Mark Harris.
That Republican won the 2018 race, but it was thrown out because of alleged voter fraud. The seat has been open since January. Democrat Dan McCready ran in both elections as a moderate, a strategy that helped Democrats seize control of the House in 2018.
Our refrain in this campaign was country over party. And I believe that when our country succeeds, we all succeed.
Democrats say the close finish is a good sign for 2020.
It tells me that the Republicans are in real trouble. There's not a chance they're going to take the House away from us. They're going to keep some of these districts, but it's so close that they have to spend an enormous amount of money.
Republicans in North Carolina also maintain control of the 3rd congressional district in North Carolina. That seat was opened upon the death back in February of Catholic Congressman Walter Jones. Now, Republicans are going to need to flip 19 Democratic seats to seize control of the House in 2020, but with a number of Republicans retiring, that's going to be very hard. Wyatt?
Correspondent Jason Calvey on Capitol Hill. Thanks, Jason. The conservative House Freedom Caucus selects a new chairman. Pro-life Congressman Andy Biggs, a Republican from Arizona, takes the helm October 1st. And Representative Biggs joins me now from Capitol Hill. Congressman, welcome back to the program.
Thanks, Wyatt. Good to be with you again.
You become the 3rd chairman of the House Freedom Caucus. What's your top priority as you get ready to step into this leadership role?
Well, I think there's a couple things that we need to focus on. First of all, Jim Jordan and Mark Meadows have done a great job positioning us as the Freedom Caucus as a national player, but also in the Congress itself. So I think we need to do a couple things. We need to leverage the strength that we have in Congress today to continue to push policies that are conservative in nature and follow the Republican Party platform. I think that's number one. Number two is we want to continue to expand our presence and help energize the base so that we can restore the House of Representatives to Republican majority. That way, what we have will be even more meaningful, because sitting in the minority, as successful as we've been, we find incredible obstacles with the other side.
Let me follow up with you on that, because like you mentioned, House Republicans in the minority. How challenging do you think it will be to advance that agenda?
Well, with Republicans in the minority, unless we have something that's fairly benign, we're not going to get bipartisan support on it. So what we end up doing is we have to use the rules and the procedures to try to slow it down so we can actually try to create public synergy against a position. And then we also have to, unfortunately, Wyatt, rely on the Senate. And so the Senate has to actually act as a backstop, because so many of the things that we don't support come through, because we simply don't have the votes in most cases to stop things.
Republicans were able to pull out 2 victories last night in North Carolina as Dan Bishop and Greg Murphy won their special elections. President Trump supported both candidates. Do you have any takeaway from last night? What were your thoughts?
Well, these are 2 great conservatives who were elected last night, and I'm looking forward to working with them in D.C., but I will tell you what I think is important is they ran to President Trump. They worked with President Trump. They used President Trump's name, and President Trump supported them. I think that shows that there's still strength in this administration and with President Trump. And the other thing I would tell you is the mainstream media had Dan Bishop all but lost. And what happened is President Trump came in a number of weeks back. Freedom Caucus has been there with him, supporting him. And the result is the mainstream media was saying, well, if he loses, that's an indictment of President Trump and his policies. But now that he's won, they don't give him kudos and say, this shows that the policies of the Trump administration are indeed supported by the American people. And that's really what I think is critical, a great takeaway there. And I think it bodes well for the future and gives some good hope for those of us who are fighting this fight.
All right, we'll obviously be keeping our eye on the work that you're doing in the Freedom Caucus and, of course, with the new House Republicans. Before we let you go, though, Representative, today is September the 11th. So I'd like to get your thoughts as we remember those Americans who lost their lives on this date 18 years ago.
Well, I think every American remembers where they were on that day. I know I do. And we know it really galvanized and united this country in a way that I don't know that I'd seen in my entire life. I don't know how we got so fractured within a short period of time, within actually 18 years, but it would be great if we could unite again and recognize how great this country is, and we have a destiny yet to fulfill. And that's what I take away from my memories here of 9/11.
I'm sure a lot of people agree with you on that sentiment. Congressman Andy Biggs, Republican from Arizona and chairman-elect of the House Freedom Caucus, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Wyatt.
Pope Francis reflects on his trip to Africa during his weekly meeting with pilgrims in St. Peter's Square.
Ringrazio Dio che mi ha concesso di compiere questo itinerario.
The Holy Father said he scattered seeds of hope in Mozambique. He added the church will continue to support the peace process in that country. The Pope also visited Mauritius and Madagascar. He returned to the Vatican late last night after the 6-day trip. Father Don Bosco Onyala, editor-in-chief of EWTN's Aussie Africa, joins us via Skype from Nairobi, Kenya. Father, what are people there saying about the Pope's visit? Do they think there's going to be concrete change because of his trip?
Well, thanks for having me. I am back to Nairobi and I've been following with people regarding the Pope's visit to Africa. What I'm hearing are very positive remarks about his visit. Moment of grace, blessings, and indeed people feel that his visit will have a lasting impact on Africa, specifically the countries that he visited, Mozambique, Madagascar, and Mauritius, and that the people feel that the church cares for them. The Holy Father visited them and he showed them that the church is close to them and they feel closer to the Catholic Church.
On his way back to the Vatican on the plane, the Holy Father said there is a cultural problem in Africa. What did he mean by that?
The Holy Father was answering a question from journalists, and specifically from a journalist from Mozambique. And it was about xenophobia as the general problem. But the Pope mentioned tribalism as one of the cultural challenges in Africa. What does this mean? This means that the Pope is aware of the challenges on the continent and that he's consistent with the messages he has released for the continent, especially when he came to Kenya in 2015. He mentioned tribalism as a challenge that must be addressed among the people of God on the continent.
Well, how important is the Catholic Church there in terms of a unifying factor? How is it able to bring people together who might be part of different tribes or from different parts of the continent?
The Catholic Church does this by promoting gospel values, by giving the example of Jesus himself, who, regardless of where people came from, social class, or even moral status, he mixed with them. So Jesus Christ is the best example that the church uses in Africa to promote peaceful existence, that he was able to destroy boundaries between people. And so the church promotes gospel values and the message of Christ on the continent.
Well, our new news service, Aussie Africa, just launched last month. From a personal perspective, what was it like for you to report on the Pope's trip?
This was a moment of grace. So I was following the Pope's visit, first of all, as a pilgrim and then as a journalist. So as a pilgrim, I was happy to be close to the Pope, but also to see the joy that the people had in meeting this Holy Father, in meeting Pope Francis. And indeed, they expressed that joy and I was able to be part of that joy. Now, for ACI Africa, it gave us an opportunity to do what we have been created to do, meaning to give visibility to church events in Africa. And the Holy Father's visit was a very good way to begin, a privilege for us to be able to do what we're supposed to do. And many people have expressed appreciation for what we did, giving them the information around the Pope's visit. So this was an opportunity, a privilege for us to start off as ACI Africa.
It was so fascinating to follow the Pope throughout this three-nation trip. And of course, we were so happy to be able to check in with you all along the way. Father Don Bosco Onyala, editor-in-chief of EWTN's Aussie Africa, thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.
Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman met yesterday with a delegation of American evangelical Christians. The Crown Prince also met recently with 2 U.S. senators. The kingdom is seeking to forge closer ties with American evangelicals while also trying to shake off its reputation for religious intolerance. The senators visiting Saudi Arabia were Angus King of Maine and Todd Young of Indiana. Scotland's highest court says it was unlawful for UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson to suspend Parliament until next month, but it stopped short of overturning the order, and opposing lawmakers remain unhappy.
Yes, Parliament should be recalled immediately so that we can deal with the crisis that is in front of the United Kingdom and so that we can get the necessary extension to the Brexit legislation and then move forward to have a general election, get rid of this government and give people in Scotland the option of choosing an independent alternative.
Instead, judges say Britain's Supreme Court must make the final decision. A hearing there is expected to begin next Tuesday. China makes a new move in its trade war with the United States. It says it is exempting several American imports from tariff hikes, but it kept in place penalties on soybeans and several other exports. Negotiations between Beijing and Washington are expected to resume next month. Coming up, Michael Knowles on the ousting of National Security Advisor John Bolton. President Donald Trump says former National Security Advisor John Bolton was not aligned with his administration's priorities. Speaking to reporters in the Oval Office, President Trump says he and Bolton disagreed in their approaches to several foreign policy issues, including North Korea and Venezuela. Bolton becomes the latest member of the president's inner circle to leave. He was the president's third National Security Advisor. Michael Knowles, host of the Michael Knowles Show at the Daily Wire, joins us. He's a conservative political commentator and a Catholic. Michael, welcome back. John Bolton is out as National Security Advisor. You tweeted about this and said that's a big mistake. Why do you think the president got this wrong?
This is a big loss for the president and for the country, and there is some disagreement over whether John Bolton was fired, which President Trump suggested in a tweet at about 11:50 a.m. yesterday morning, or whether John Bolton resigned, which is John Bolton's side of the story. I suggest, and I suspect rather, in this case, that Ambassador Bolton most likely resigned. The reason I think that is that President Trump really benefited from having him in that position, even though he had a more bellicose or more aggressive approach to U.S. foreign policy than the president seems to have preferred, and then some of the president's other advisors. I feel it gave the president a lot of credibility. John Bolton is one of the best operators in Washington, D.C., one of the smartest foreign policy minds in the town.
Well, then what does Bolton's leaving say about the divisions within the administration over those national security issues?
This is what it really tells us. It tells us that the president, who ran in 2016, you'll remember, in part as a dove, he said he wants to get out of the wars that we're in and not start any new wars. He also ran a little bit as a hawk. He said we have to go in and destroy ISIS. We went in, we did militarily destroy ISIS. Ambassador Bolton has urged more confrontation with Iran. He was stymied in that decision. We did not take action when Iran shot down our drone. Then I think the timing is a little too coincidental with this apparent Taliban meeting at Camp David that almost took place just days before 9/11 over the weekend. I think that may have been the straw that broke the camel's back. And so what you're seeing is the Trump administration moving in an even more dovish direction as we head into 2020. It does appear that that's where the Republican base in the country is more broadly, but it is a loss to lose one of the great foreign policy minds from the White House.
You mentioned Iran as one of those key issues. Today, Iran's President Hassan Rouhani is urging the U.S. to abandon its maximum pressure policy on his country. Earlier this week, President Trump seemed to leave that door open for potential meetings, though. Should the president agree to such a meeting? I mean, is it even worth trying to talk with Iran's leaders?
Iran does not negotiate in good faith. We've seen that. President Trump has made that very clear. President Trump campaigned on ripping up that awful Iran deal in 2016. He did rip it up, and that was the right decision. Look, the president has used the art of the deal, to use his phrase, very effectively while in office. So I'm not suggesting he's naive, but he certainly should not be taken in by the mullahs. They are not going to negotiate in good faith, just as the Taliban would not negotiate in good faith. And I think Ambassador Bolton made that very clear. I think he sees the mullahs in Iran with crystal clear precision, and unfortunately some of the other forces in the Trump administration might, I think, be a little misled in their optimism for negotiating with Iran.
So many important foreign policy issues, whether or not Bolton is there or not. We're going to continue to keep an eye on that. Michael Knowles, host of the Michael Knowles Show at the Daily Wire. Thanks so much.
Good to see you, Wyatt.
A federal judge has blocked a pro-life law in North Dakota. The state measure requires doctors to tell women they could reverse a medical abortion if they have second thoughts. The director of North Dakota's only abortion clinic says the law would force physicians to give, quote, false information. Lawmakers say they're reviewing the ruling. Up next, a helicopter pilot gives us his memories of September 11th. As we remember the tragedy that struck our nation 18 years ago, we also honor those who answered the call of duty. Our next guest falls into that category. Brad Bowman joins me now. He's Senior Director of the Center on Military and Political Power at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Brad, welcome in. You're a former Army Black Hawk pilot. Take us back to 9/11. Tell us about the day and how events unfolded for you.
Sure. Thank you. It's an honor to be with you. On that morning, I was a company commander in the U.S. Army of a helicopter unit, and we were doing our annual weapons training down at Fort A.P. Hill when we first heard of the attack. And I had made the decision to fly 2 of our Black Hawk helicopters down there for that training that were normally on standby for classified emergency missions. And when we learned what had happened, I was quick to get those back to the D.C. area. For the rest of that day, my unit flew military leaders away from our nation's capital into hide sites, not knowing whether another attack was coming. And then that night, I put myself on a mission to fly the Deputy Secretary of Defense from one of those hide sites, what I thought was back to the CIA headquarters, but he instead said he wanted to go to the Pentagon.
Interesting. So obviously that's an enormous responsibility, having to transport these people. Were you concerned with your own safety as if something else might happen later in the day or that evening?
You know, looking back now these many years, it's all surreal. You know, when we came in low back to our airfield, thoughts like, well, if the we weren't sure, we had heard about something happened in D.C. We weren't sure whether it was at the State Department. We weren't sure the status of the Capitol. There was a lot unknown at that point. And so the thoughts go through your mind, you know, might they be targeting military assets in the region as well? So you think about that, but then you also just think about what, you know, the task that you have in front of you, which is getting the helicopter from point A to point B.
Let me ask you, just because you personally are a Christian, during either that night or in the days to follow, did you ever lean on your faith? Did you have to think about that and meditate on any of that?
Yeah, I think so. I've been a Christian my whole life, and it's a core part of who I am. And you know, I asked myself, how could such evil exist? Why did this happen? What can we do about it? And you know, an all-powerful God permitted this to happen, and so you start to ask the bigger questions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
How do you think then did your faith helped you to work through the tragedy and just continue to do your duty?
Yeah, no, I mean, seeing the Pentagon still in flames that night, and then seeing the Shanksville site a day or two later, and then seeing Ground Zero all within that first week as a pilot taking leaders to those various places, we slowly over time started to get a grasp for what had happened to our country. And then, of course, the remains from the Pentagon came into our base in the days after that. And as you saw the human toll, all the people that didn't go home to their families that night, like I did, you know, it reminds you that life is fragile, that you don't know how long you have live on this earth, and you want to live each day right and as best you can.
Such an important message, and obviously we thank you for your service to this country and for all those servicemen and women out there who continue to stay true even during very scary situations on that day.
Yeah.
Brad Bowman, Senior Director for the Center on Military and Political Power at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Thanks so much for coming in and talking with us.
Thank you so much.
Sure. And with that, we conclude our newscast for tonight. We thank you for watching. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Wyatt Goolsby. We'll end tonight with more from today's tributes for 9/11. Good night, and God bless.
Master Sergeant Max J. Belkey, United States Army retired. Romeo Mishundan, United States Navy.
Sharon Ann Carver.
Vivian Castaldic.
John Francis Casaza.
Kevin L. Bowles.
Gary R. Box.
Gennady Boyarsky.
Pamela Boyce.
And my brother, Peter Lewis Freund, and my cousin, Timothy Patrick McSweeney, both FDNY. We love you, we miss you, and you'll always be America's heroes.